Hello everyone, my name is Kitetsu and welcome back to my channel. So I said to you guys yesterday that the next video I would make would be on the Skaven, and I'm loath to call this a Battletome review because it's not going to be that in depth, and other people have already done that, and some people have gone into crazy amounts of detail on all of the updates to the Warscrolls. So there was one that was actually amazing on TGA on the forums. If you guys haven't seen that already, I will leave a link in the description. So if you want to go unit by unit and see every change to every Warscroll, you can see that. But what I want to do with this book instead is give my thoughts on Skaven as a whole. Has Games Workshop fixed them with this book? And I've talked quite extensively about the Skaven on my channel. There were some glowing issues that I absolutely hated, and it basically meant that I put all of my Skaven figures into a box and forgot about them for a couple of years. So this book was really a big deal for me. It was very much make or break. And if you aren't familiar with my other videos, they were released quite a long time ago, so you know, my channel's got an awful lot bigger since then. The biggest issue that I had with the faction was the way that they weren't united, similar to how things were with the Death faction before the Legions of Nagash Battletome came along. Pestilence, Verminous, Scryer, they were all completely separate sub-factions. I mean, if we open the last General's Handbook and try and find the Skaven, let's go for Verminous just to prove a point. That there was your army. Literally 4 different options that you could take. That was Scryer, and there was this absolutely balmy system where you ended up having to take absolutely every one of the other clans as an ally if you wanted to make a sort of united Skaven faction. Say you wanted to take Thanquol and Bone Ripper in your army, you would have to take him as an ally, but because he was 400 points, that made it pretty difficult to do so. You basically needed to have a minimum of a 2,000 point army, and then that would take up your entire ally list. And back then, if you wanted to just take them as a Skaven faction, you didn't have allegiance abilities specific for Skaven as a whole, which meant that you'd basically have to take them as a generic Chaos army. And the worst thing of all was that Skaven only had a single option for battle line, and that was the Clan Rats. And bearing in mind the Clan Rats have a minimum unit size of 20, that means that you had to take 60 of them if you wanted a 2,000 point army. That was something I just really couldn't stand. I love the idea of having the different clans separately, and I like the fact that they have all of these battle line options available to them. But at the same time, I personally want an army that I can have Thanquol and Bone Ripper as the general, then I want loads of Storm Fiends, Warp Lightning Cannons, but I also love the Pestilence models, I love the Verminous models. I basically just want all of it in one faction. So the first thing I did when I got this book was head straight over to the pitch battle profiles to see if they had fixed the composition of the army. Now, I'm not sure if this was something I recommended in one of my own videos, but I said Games Workshop definitely needed to add more battle line options to Skaven, and they have added one more. And to me, this makes one of the biggest key differences to the Skaven faction overall, and that is over here. The Storm Vermin are now battle line if you have a Skaven army, okay? So as long as everything in your army has the Skaven Tide keyword, they are now battle line. What that means is the days of being forced to take 60 Clan Rats are over, and if you're playing just a Vanguard army, you can buy one box of Storm Vermin which contains your 20 figures. You can split that into 2 units of 10, and you have your fully legal army with 2 battle line options. I guess my issue with the Skaven is that they're a horde army, and that's not how I personally want to play them. As someone who's always preferred 1000 point games anyway, I don't want to have to be pushing around tens and tens of clan rats around a board, so I'm so glad they've made this change. But the other key difference to the unit composition, as you see here, is that all of the battle line if options, of which there are an awful lot of them, they now let you take either that clan's respective general, or you can take a master clan general as well. What that means is, say I want an army of literally all clan Scryer, which is quite a tempting proposition, I can still take Thanquol and Bone Ripper as the general with absolutely no penalty. So again, it's a massive improvement over the way it was before, where essentially certain units would have just been locked out of your ability to take due to the really clunky ally system. Okay, so those were the things I absolutely loved about the pitched battle profiles. I think they have definitely fixed the Skaven for me, but let's move on to some of the other things that I really liked. One of them was actually the allegiance abilities, and the way they've designed it is that you have basically generic allegiance abilities finally for the Skaven Tide as a whole, and then there are bonuses for having units from each of the great clans. Basically, that means that it fixes exactly what I was complaining about at the beginning of the video, that I want an army that is basically just Skaven, and I no longer get penalised. In fact, I actually get benefits from having that. I get the Skaven Tide allegiance abilities, but then something really kind of unique is that the benefits for having units from the other clans are kind of universal. And what I mean by that is you basically don't have to have an entire Eshin clan army to benefit from their specific allegiance abilities. I don't have to have a purely Verminous or Scryer or Master Clan army in order to benefit from their respective buffs. For example, in the Ways of the Great Clans, if I have a Master Clan model and it uses a command ability, I get to take advantage of this allegiance ability. If your army includes any Clan Eshin's heroes, you get to take advantage of this. For Verminous, you basically have to include some of the Claw Lords. If your army includes any of the Clan Scryer heroes, you get to take advantage of their Warpstone Sparks. Hopefully you guys all remember what those were from the General's Handbook. But you see where I'm going with this. As long as I'm including some Pestilence Priests, some Clan Scryer heroes, some Claw Lords, a Clan Mulder Fighting Beast, a Master Clan hero that can use a command ability, and a Clan Eshin hero, I get to take advantage of all of these benefits. It's kind of unique, it's kind of cool. I can imagine some people being a little bit off-put and wishing that they were more specifically locked to those clans, but personally, where I want to have a mix of everything, it's really good. Then of course you get the benefit of having those extra battle line options if you do choose to purely focus on a specific clan. It basically means now that Skaven are first and foremost a Skaven Tide army. You're actively encouraged to mix as much as you can together. They've got rid of all of the ridiculous ally system, more or less. So yeah, they've basically just fixed a huge issue with the army. Obviously, you've got your command traits, which are broken down into your Master Clan, your Scryer, Pestilence, Verminous, Mulder, and Eshin. You've got artifacts of power for the exact same list of clans. You've got a spell lore for the Greyseers and for Scryer. You know, in terms of the actual Warscrolls, I'm not going to bother spending ages going through them, as I said, but they have improved things to the point where now there are units that are definitely worth taking. I don't have my Pestilence Battletome on me, but if you think about things like the Plague Claws, I really love them. I love the idea of artillery, but at the same time, when you look at their Warscroll, they're hitting and wounding on a 3, they've got excellent rend, they do d6 damage, which is amazing, but you're relying on that one attack hitting. But thanks to their ability, and I'm pretty sure they had this already, you can add 1 to hit rolls and increase the damage characteristic to 2d6 if you're firing at a target with more than 10 models. In fact, I think this might be a specific changing to the wording. I think it had to have more than 10 models before, whereas now it is 10 or more, because let's face it, most units are either going to be 5 or 10. So you're firing at a unit of 10 models, you're now doing 2d6 damage, which is really good. You're hitting on a 2, and if you take the Foul Rain Congregation, which is really easy to build, basically 1 Plague Priest and 3 Plague Claws, you're adding 1 to wound rolls as well, all the while that they're within 13 inches of the Plague Priest. So you can have a situation where you have 3 Plague Claws, which are hitting and wounding on a 2, and doing 2d6 damage each. That's pretty nasty, and they have excellent range. So as you go through the Warscrolls, you find that there are just changes absolutely all over the place, and most of them are definitely for the better. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for Storm Vermin, and whilst I'm super happy that they have now made them a battle line for Skaventide, they have massively nerfed them. They used to have these amazing clan shields that would give them a 4+ save all the time they are being attacked by damage 1 weapons, and they also used to have an ability, I think it was called Murderous Ferocity, where they would all gain +1 to hit if they are fighting against a unit that has fewer than 10 models, I believe. So your default Storm Vermin had a 4+ save, and each one was hitting on a 3+. Now you have to basically rely on the buff from their allegiance abilities, which adds 1 to hit rolls if they have 20 or more models. So again, for me, that's a massive nerf, because I'm not going to take these in units of 20. I'll probably, because I'm playing smaller games, have them in units of 10. You can still take advantage of the Clawlord's command ability that adds 1 to the attack characteristic for a clan's Verminous unit. And there is a Warscroll battalion, the Claw Horde, which means you can actually pick as many units as possible that are within 13 inches of your Clawlord. And again, that's very, very easy to build. You just need 1 Clawlord, a unit of Storm Vermin, and 2 units of Clan Rats. So you know there are workarounds, but then you do have to pay the extra points. I mean, that battalion is 180 points, which you could essentially have another whole unit of 10 Storm Vermin and still have points to spare. I guess Games Workshop is still playing very cautiously with the Warscroll battalions, and I know that they were responsible for people hating 7th edition 40k to a large extent. So, you know, I'm glad they're playing on the edge of caution, but they certainly are expensive. I guess another thing to point out, which is maybe a little bit negative, is that you can notice that I assume the Pestilence Warscroll battalions have all come from the Battletome, because there are 4 of them. And then as soon as you go to the other ones, although the Scryer ones are great, there is only 1 for the other clans. So I think it would have been nice to have definitely seen some more Warscroll battalions in here, considering how many clans there are and what a massive army this is. Now, one of the things I really like about the theme that they've gone with for Skaven, in terms of how competitive they are as a faction, it's hard to tell, but nearly everything in the army has this ability to overcharge and essentially do insane damage at a risk of more or less outright killing the model or unit that has tried to do that. You know, the Warlock Engineer and the Bombardier, they can both do d6 damage themselves and outright kill those models basically from trying to overcharge their Warp Lightning. There are other subtle buffs that I really like. So the Warp Lightning Cannon follows the exact same theme. You can essentially double the number of dice or attacks that this thing can make at the risk of suffering, I think it's, D3 mortal wounds for every roll of a 1 that you make. So potentially in the unlikely situation that you roll 12 ones, you're doing 12 times d3 damage, so 24 wounds. It's definitely hard to judge the competitiveness of the army. At the moment, I'm feeling like they're not going to be a top tier, super competitive army. And in that sense, it makes me think that when I'm playing them, I'm definitely always going to overpower everything, and just for the fun of it, I'm going to do that. I feel like the risks are definitely worth it. You know, if half my army goes up in green warpstone smoke, then fine, whatever, it's kind of funny. But funnily enough, I feel like they're going to be extremely effective at dealing with other horde armies. Now, warp fire projectors, these things have massively changed. Essentially, if you're attacking a unit with these things now, you basically roll a dice for every single model within the range, which is 8 inches, and for every 4+, they suffer a mortal wound. In many ways, I actually prefer the way that they've changed the warp fire projectors now, because they are so nasty at dealing with horde armies. If you're firing at a unit of 20 and the whole lot of them are in range, you're basically outright just going to wipe out half of that unit. So some pretty nasty stuff in here. They've massively improved the Vermin Lords as well, which I'm a big fan of. I must admit, I did always think that the Warlock Engineers were a little bit useless. They were certainly uninspiring. So having these extra bits of synergy where now they can actually improve Warp Lightning Cannons and stuff like that definitely means that they're now an auto-include in my army. But yeah, that's all I'm going to really say about the Warscrolls and the different rules changes. The painting guides are exceptionally good. At the moment, I've got out my Thanquol and Bone Ripper model, and I'm painting Bone Ripper. He's out of reach at the moment. I'll put up some photos to show you how the painting of that is going. But there's some great tutorials on skin, the red cloth. There's also this absolutely amazing new paint scheme scattered through the book that I really love, and whoever has painted these is amazing. But basically it's this blue and red scheme. I'm saying it's new, I suppose it's been around for a really long time, but seeing an entire army painted in that looks fantastic. You know, there are loads and loads of pictures. I hope it's actually showing up. It's really dark in this room at the moment. You know, this is one of the downfalls of trying to film a video like this in winter, but as soon as I try and turn a light on, the glare across these sheets is basically, you know, it makes it unreadable. But yeah, you've got the paint scheme there for doing the blue armor. You've got the paint scheme for the red cloth, the skin, all of the different ways you could try and paint fur is in here. How to do warpstone, Skaven blades. There's even tutorials for the wood and all of the Vermin Lord armor. So yeah, no, I was really impressed with the painting guides. I think it would have been good to have seen a specific tip on how to do the Skaven tails. But what I'm doing at the moment with my Bone Ripper is I'm kind of alternating between the Warhammer TV tutorials and the tutorials in here. Because for once, although I absolutely love Duncan's tutorial, there are things in here that I think have been updated and the colours are just slightly better. For example, I really like how they've done the kind of copper look. Having looked at the composition of the army and the points changes, the second thing I did immediately after that was head over to the lore section. And I'm glad I just opened it on this page, because the first thing I want to say is the new pieces of artwork, of which there aren't that many, but the new pieces of artwork look absolutely gorgeous. I haven't seen this piece of artwork anywhere else before, but it's our first look, I assume, if this really is the first time we've seen it. This is our first look of the Great Horned Rat, so that's a really cool picture. But even better, there is this double page gorgeous spread of Thanquol and Bone Ripper attacking the Caradron Overlords, and they are from Barak Nar, so I hope the camera is doing this justice because it looks absolutely incredible. And this brings me on to what I rushed to the lore section to see. Now, the more observant of you will see already that there's the War Scroll for Thanquol and Bone Ripper, and I've been talking about him a lot, and you'll all know by now that he is back in the army. But I was so keen to see how they were going to include him and to make sure that that was something that they were definitely going to do. So this here was probably the third page I actually looked at in this book. I'm so happy that they have included Thanquol and Bone Ripper in the Skaven army again. I think Games Workshop were in a really difficult position of what to do with that model, because he came out during the end times with the Storm Fiends and the Vermin Lord, and then they destroyed Warhammer Fantasy, and it was like, okay, what are we going to do with these models that we've literally just released? We've spent all this time designing and releasing Thanquol and Bone Ripper, one of the best models I think Games Workshop have ever released, and then they basically had to kill that character. So I'm wondering if that's part of the reason why it's taken so long for a Skaven Tide book to appear. You know, they definitely will have not known what to do with that model. And I guess it's not a particular spoiler anymore, but the Realm Slayer audiobook apparently does include Thanquol and Bone Ripper as a bit of a cameo in there. So I'd known for a while that they definitely were going to include this character in the lore of Age of Sigmar. But it is nice that it's now official and canon. The only downside to that is that the lore you get for him is incredibly brief and sparse. You know, if you break that down, it's probably about 10 sentences worth of information, and it's very vague, basically saying, oh, he's back and we don't know why. You know, has he got some form of sinister plot? Which is cool. But if you compare that to the detailed backstories we were getting for characters like this in the end times, and even before that, if you just picked up a Warhammer Fantasy army book, the backstories were enormous for each character, so I'm really disappointed that there wasn't more on him. But I do love the fact that it's legitimizing me reading all of these Gotrek and Felix books, which I'm absolutely loving, because this guy is definitely one of the best villains in Warhammer Fantasy. And it's nice that now all of that is still even more relevant to Age of Sigmar than it was before. But other than that, I think when I read through the lore section, there was only a couple of other mentions of Thanquol and Bone Ripper, and that was during the timeline. Where is it? Here we go. The Corpse Thing War. Basically, he pops up, attacks the Caradron Overlords, and as quickly as he attacks, he disappears. So that's all you really hear. Nevertheless, I'm still glad he's back, but I wish they would just start to push this narrative forwards a little bit further and commit to these things that are a little bit vague. I think that's actually a theme that runs through the rest of the lore here too. It's all good, but it's nothing new. If you're as up to date on Skaven in Age of Sigmar as I am, there was very little new information here. And again, like, if that's your box on Blight City, it tells you so little about the place. I think it would have been better if they'd literally done a map of it or something. Even if they'd have just taken a region of Blight City and mapped it out a little bit further to start making these places feel a bit more real. You do hear a little bit here about it being founded, but again, if you go to the Great Horned Rat, they tell you so little about him. There's a little bit of a blurb there, and then it goes straight into the Council of 13 and how the Skaven operate as a whole. So I think the lore was definitely a bit disappointing. You know, they're working with so much background that I guess that's difficult to include all in one book. But it definitely did not grip me in the way that, say, the Gloomspite Gitz book did. And I'm guessing that had an unfair advantage because everything was completely new. But even so, I was left a little bit disappointed. I ended up spending a hell of a lot longer looking through the rules and the painting tutorials than I did the lore section. I suppose whilst we were talking about Thanquol as well, you know, they've included him in the lore. Does his inclusion make sense from a storyline perspective? Because I never actually mentioned that. Not really. He basically got imprisoned and then released from another dimension. Does it make sense? Doesn't matter. To be honest, I'm just glad he's back. I'm willing to accept a wishy-washy, trapped in another dimension and he's returned. You know, the Skaven normally live to about 10 years old. We're so many thousands of years later than fantasy, but you know, whatever, he's back. I was going to mention his rules because obviously those have changed significantly as well. Part of that comes from his changes to the warp fire projectors, but something I did want to mention that I absolutely love is before, when people bought this model, they would basically always build him with the warp fire projectors. Now they've changed it so that you can arm him with any combination of warp fire projectors and the braziers. So if you want, you can drop one warp fire projector and you can put a brazier on there instead to give him just a bit more potency in, you know, close quarters fighting. But he basically will not be quite as potent now as he was with his original rules. He used to just do an auto 2d6 mortal wounds. Now with the configuration I've given him with the 4 warp fire projectors, he's going to roll 4 dice for every model in the unit that you are targeting, and for every 4+, like with the Storm Fiends, he's going to cause a mortal wound. But obviously a 4+ is a 50-50 chance of passing, so that means on average you are doing 2 mortal wounds per model, which is absolutely devastating. It basically means on average every time he fires at a unit, he should wipe out pretty much the whole thing. That's nasty, and I'm glad they have left him as dangerous as he was. Okay, so are there any other downsides? I guess the first thing is, why did it have to take so long for this book to come out? It should have been out so long ago. Wow, it is really getting dark in here. I hope this video is still going to be viewable by the time I'm done with it. But considering they are such a beloved faction, this should have been a priority of Games Workshop years ago, in my opinion. I also think that due to their massive toolset of different units that you can take, I think it's going to be quite hard to find a list of like a one list fits all kind of army, a kind of middle ground. You know, things like the Plague Claw or the Warp Lightning Cannon, they're going to be almost an auto include against certain armies, but it literally depends what you are up against. And I know that applies to almost every army that you build in Age of Sigmar, but I think where their toolset is so large, I think that's going to be a particular issue here. Other negatives I found, I guess this one was quite an obscure one, but if you wanted a purely clan scry list, they don't have their own Vermin Lord. So whilst you can take a Master Clan Vermin Lord, I think it's called a Warpseer, or yeah, here we go, the Vermin Lord Warpseer, you can take that as your general because he's Master Clan and he can lead your Clan Scryer army, but that means you then can't include Thanquol and Bone Ripper as well. I thought it would be quite cool to, you know, have a purely Clan Scryer army but with a Vermin Lord and with Thanquol and Bone Ripper, but you can't really do it. I guess taking this book as like a relaunch of the Skaven in general, I was also really disappointed that they didn't use this opportunity to update some of the old models as well. You know, as an army, Skaven are looking pretty good in terms of their kits, but the Scryer Acolytes are about £8 or something a model, so they really need to update those. And I don't think they've got any pictures of them in here. Maybe they do, I'm not really sure. But the Jezzails, they again seriously need an update, and they're so expensive now that I would definitely have liked to have seen those updated. Now, I guess the only last thing I need to say to finish up is that I was very surprised that they have completely killed these guys. It's so dark in here, I hope you can see them. But the Poison Wind Mortars are just completely gone from this book, and they're one of my favourite sculpts. So why they got rid of these, I have no idea. And as a general theme, looking through the books and the pictures, they've got all of the old Rat Ogre models. Every time you see the Warlock Engineers, they're the old kits. What I don't understand is that they had the Spire of Dawn set, which included these amazing Poison Wind Mortars. They had an amazing Warlock Engineer model. They had these awesome Rat Ogres. All the kits are there. Why have they not just released those? I know they were exclusive for that box set, but if you have the models and they look this good, just release them. Let people buy them. They look fantastic. They look so much better than some of the older kits. I have no idea why they can't just bring those out. You know, writing these out of the Battletome full stop, I have no idea what that's about, and that really disappoints me because, you know, I'm a big fan of artillery. Having some of these just sitting on your back line, firing their mortars, I really liked them. They were one of my favourite units. But yeah, I have no idea why they are not in here. I think the only view we get of literally one of these models is the Warlock Engineer over here. And in all other pictures, it's the old kit, which is the one you can buy on their website. But I guess overall, I'm just a bit disappointed that Games Workshop didn't see the launch of this book as an opportunity to just update maybe 2 or 3 kits and then release the kits that are already out there, that are already sculpted and modelled. But yeah, I guess otherwise that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about the book. I think overall I would have liked to have seen a bit more complexity to the book, especially when it comes down to the individual clans. I kind of guess the ideal is comparing them to Black Legion in 40k, where every clan should be an army in its own right, but then the Black Legion can come along and just take the whole lot together. And it feels like they've definitely done that, but it's a little bit half-hearted. But, oh, whilst we're on the page with Storm Fiends as well, just another little buff that I remembered seeing as my model is sitting here of one of my Storm Fiends. The Storm Fiends that had the rattling cannons have had a significant buff as well. They now wound on a 3+. I forgot to mention that. That was something I wanted to say. But initially, you know, if you're firing 3d6 shots and they hit and wound on 4s, it sounds great on paper, but when you do the maths, it's actually not that good, so I'm really glad they buffed that. But that is the last thing I want to say about the Skaven. I'm really glad they brought this book out. I am going to dust off and paint all of my Skaven models. Now that the video is extremely dark, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys really soon.